I am thrilled to welcome to Yang Speaks one of the people I was so excited to connect with on the trail, a fellow presidential candidate, spiritual guide to millions, Miss Marianne Williamson. Marianne, welcome to Yang Speaks. It's so great to see you.
Thank you, Andrew. It's always great to see you.
Yes, so you and I have been through a lot together. I guess we could use this as an opportunity for some collegial therapy about the presidential campaign and then our time afterwards. But you and I bonded over the fact that it seems like the media was more interested in presenting some figment of their imagination than the actual individuals that we were. And certainly I felt like that was true in your case, where you had this breakout debate performance on one of the first two debates. You were one of the most Googled people for everyone. Everyone was really excited about you, and they saw what I'd seen already, which is that you were speaking the truth and connecting with folks in a really important way. And then it was almost like this strange shark attack where it seemed like everywhere you looked there was some kind of negative media treatment, like it's like, oh no, like you can't be excited about this person, and that was the way it seemed from my perspective, but certainly from your perspective I'm sure it was much more visceral.
Well, it didn't just seem that way, it was that way. Clearly someone said, get that woman off the stage. That was very clear. And I saw it in some of their eyes backstage after the debate when we were in the spin room. I saw some people whose eyes said, lady, you're dead, you will not be coming back. But I underestimated the viciousness, the strategy, the obvious talking points. She's dangerous, she's crazy, she's anti-science, she's anti-vax, you'd think I was, well, whatever. And so, yeah. It was ubiquitous, wasn't it? That I had told AIDS patients not to take their medicine, which was particularly ridiculous given my history with AIDS patients and the fact that at that time there was no medicine. I mean, the most vile and vicious things, actually. And I thought in terms of you, it was particularly interesting because I thought that the misogyny was very clear. You did things, Andrew, that I thought were adorable, like when you put whipped cream in your volunteers' mouths and when you crowd surfed and, all that. If I had done those things? So, yeah, it was quite something.
Well, certainly you can't live in America and not know that gender plays an enormous role in treatment of really anyone, but political and presidential candidates at a much higher level. And I agree with you that some of the things that happened on my campaign would have seemed very, very different if it had come from another candidate.
And also, you didn't have any previous political experience. So why did they make that such a big deal in my case, but not in yours? So,
well, they made it a big deal in my case too.
Yeah, not the same way. You know it's not the same way. Yeah.
No, well, I mean, the media treatment of the two of us was different, for sure. And like the caricatures they painted were different. And that, it was painful for me watching what people were writing about you, given that you and I had connected. So, like, I knew you for months before these debates occurred. And if you speak to someone individually, you can tell that they're thoughtful, patriotic, sincere, and then when you see various things being written about them, you're like, well, where the heck did that come from? And I agree with you. Like, I'd underestimated the capacity of the media to write a story that suited their needs rather than something that they were actually interacting with in real life.
Yeah, and the lack of journalistic ethics, the using anonymous tweets as a source, a lie or false narrative is repeated, and then they just repeat it again and repeat it again. The interesting thing and the sad thing for me was that when I actually spoke to audiences, people knew who I was, but what that smear did was convinced so many people that they didn't want to come hear me. But I don't leave the experience just with those memories. I leave the experience with very inspiring and motivating and encouraging and loving memories, because, as you know, because you were there doing the same thing, the people that we were talking to, the voters, were fantastic. Now, there's the voters, and then there's the political media industrial complex. You fared better by the media political machine than I did, but we had the same experience of the voters, and it was wonderful. And that gap between those two, I find tragic, because what you represented, what I represented, what Bernie represented in our own different ways was a different conversation, a new conversation, one that did not adhere to the same old formulations. And what I experienced, as you did too, is that the people are ready for that. The problem is not with the decency, the dignity, or even the regenerative interest of the American people. And that's where our democracy is broken, and I hope as the months and years unfold that rupture can be healed.
Wherever I went, people loved you. And I had the same experience that you did, where when you have conversations with actual voters or families just trying to improve their lives, it was essentially a completely different conversation than what was being had in the media. And that connection was, for me, profound. I think you had more experience having that connection with people than I, because you've been a spiritual leader for so long. For me, frankly, it was like completely new, where like I said in another interview, I was surprised anytime anyone was excited to see me because well, you know, I was new to public life.
Your stump speech was, you know, this whole conversation. Of course, I read your book early in the campaign, which I thought was a wonderful book, and became totally convinced. I had no problem with that whatsoever. I had always been aware that Milton Friedman himself had said that the only way trickle-down economics would work, he said, was with a universal basic income. So I was already somewhat exposed to the idea, but having read your book, certainly was on board with that. And then in your stump speech, the whole technology conversation. I think people know that the fact that that is so left out. I mean, we all remember when Orrin Hatch said to Mark Zuckerberg, "How do you make money?" I mean, right? And I think we could all feel that your conversation around technology was something that we absolutely must be having in this country.
Well, it feels like the substance of your campaign has continued to progress and grow. I feel like Joe said something that people somewhat attributed to you during the DNC. Did you see this, where he said, like, it's darkness versus light, and we're going to bring the light? Yeah,
and I wrote a book in the 1998 called Healing the Soul of America, so it's a concept I'm pretty familiar with. However, interestingly enough, when I wrote that book, I didn't just say heal the soul of America. I actually talked about the policies that were necessary in order to realign the soul of America with people's lives. So everything that they said I was, but I wasn't, is almost what I feel this Healing the Soul of America campaign on Joe's behalf is, like, talk to me policy, talk to me policy, talk to me policy. Pretty ironic, I think.
Well, when we were stumping around the early states, you know, Joe was making the same case, like that there's a battle for the soul of America, and you presented it in different terms. I feel like so many people were drawn to you because your diagnosis of what has gone wrong, I think we all can see. It's that there is something more than just this one malignant narcissist who happens to occupy the White House right now.
Absolutely.
There's this entire almost disease. And your prescription was spiritual renewal. You said, look, like, you can't beat the disease with bullet points, or you can't beat the disease with. So the two things were tied together, I feel like, where number one is the need for profound renewal, and then number two, a prescription that actually takes concrete forms and improves people's lives.
Well, the concrete forms are extremely important, because when you say spiritual renewal, spirituality is simply the path of the heart. An economic system that places profitability, short-term profitability for huge multinational corporate entities before any moral or ethical concern or responsibility to people or to planet, that's a political issue. It's an economic issue that reflects heartlessness. And that has been going on for 40 years. That trickle-down economics is based on that idea that the only responsibility of the corporation should be fiduciary towards stockholders at the expense of other stakeholders like workers or planet or community or environment. So that is a disease. It's not like a disease. It's a moral disease. And interestingly enough, like I said before, even Milton Friedman, who mainly articulated that, said this will only work if you have a universal basic income. And of course, they left that part out. So it's a spiritual malfunction. But I never on the campaign, nor do I now, disconnect that from the economic and political and social issues which reflect that heartlessness, which have caused some unbelievable unnecessary suffering for millions of people, tens of millions of people here in the United States and elsewhere. We don't have health insurance because of health insurance companies and big pharma. That's why we don't have, why we don't have Medicare for all. We have a foreign policy that is driven more by short-term profits for defense contractors because the military-industrial complex has more power than the State Department. We give $760 billion to the Defense Department, $40 billion to the State Department. So I don't think the conversation is puffy. It's not woo-woo. In fact, I think the conversation they're having on the campaign now is too woo-woo for my taste. I think we need to be talking about the political changes and the economic changes that absolutely have to occur in order to heal this country.
Well, one thing that I've found so heartening, Marianne, is that you and I agreed, I think, on the vast majority of policy, and we arrived at it from different angles, where I had this sort of technology lens where I was like, oh, this is really not going to work very well. It's just going to work worse and worse as technology takes off. And you came at it from a values lens, but arrived at a lot of the same places. And I was thrilled that you championed universal basic income before the pandemic hit. Now it seems like everyone's on board with universal basic income or a version thereof. but you saw it during the campaign.
Yeah, I did.
And many of the things that you described, I completely agree with, where you described our healthcare system as like, look, this is not actually a system to make us healthy. Like this is a system of profit and revenue, and that we need to have a completely different approach if you're going to try and actually make us stronger and healthier. There were so many things you said that I think people agree with, and I think that one of the marks of your campaign is that a lot of your ideas are continuing to grow in resonance.
Yes.
And the pandemic has, unfortunately for everyone, laid bare a lot of the nonsense where like people were arguing about healthcare delivery, and now it's like, well, shoot, if you have a pandemic, you kind of need some kind of universal healthcare system if you're going to be able to help people or fight the pandemic. For a basic income now, it's, well, shoot, there are millions of people that don't have jobs through no fault of their own, and we need to deliver economic resources to them.
We had 40% of Americans even before the pandemic who could not be able to absorb a $400 unexpected expenditure. We had 93 million people even before the pandemic who were living near poverty. We had hundreds of thousands of people who were homeless. We had millions of people living with chronic economic despair. So you came at it from the place of that's not workable. I came at it from a place of that's unbelievable accumulation of economic tension and anxiety and despair, which is never workable. It is outrageous. So the same heartless, immoral economic ethos that dominated our political system before the pandemic is now just on steroids. I mean, the fact that Mitch McConnell yesterday, they finally come out with a plan, it is almost a slap in the face. It is almost, I'd call it the drop-dead plan. And how people, the American people have been so trained for so long to expect so little.
Yeah.
But they're showing their rage.
We've had our expectations
lowered and lowered and lowered.
Yeah.
And so many people propagandized to believe that somehow it's for their own good. that they have to struggle the way they do. I love during the Republican convention when Mike Pence was saying all these wonderful things about this woman. And she was a wonderful woman. I think her son was, I can't remember, but something. And he said, she's so wonderful and she works 3 jobs. And I thought to myself, you're proud of that?
We should not be celebrating the need to work 3 jobs. That's not a sign of virtue or anything that we should be celebrating.
Yeah.
It's a sign that we're all on this hamster wheel, and that sometimes not even one hamster wheel will do the trick. Like, you need to get on 3 simultaneously in order to make ends meet in a lot of parts of the country. So did you watch the... I watched both the DNC and the RNC.
I thought you were great, by the way. I thought you were wonderful. Yes, I watched all of the Democratic and all of the Republican.
Me too. And like it was a fascinating parallel universe. Like, I felt myself dropped into with really, to some extent, both of them, honestly. But I recognized more of one than the other. And the RNC, I joked that it felt like the movie Starship Troopers to me. I don't know if you remember that movie.
No, but I saw you tweet about it, and I looked it up. Yeah,
It's a satire of authoritarianism is what the movie was.
Well, I didn't think it was satire at all. It was the very real thing. I thought that the Republican convention was evil genius. I thought it was brilliant in its maleficence?
Malevolent?
Yeah, it was malevolent in a brilliant way. The way they took genuine moments, genuine human authenticity, and they wrapped it around big lies. I thought it was brilliant in a very evil way. And also, the thing that I felt was the saddest, as someone who wants Joe Biden to win very badly, they prosecuted a case against Joe Biden. Why didn't the Democratic convention prosecute a case against Donald Trump? If ever there was a prosecutable criminal in the White House, here it is. They didn't prosecute a case. Kamala Harris is a famous prosecutor. Why didn't you prosecute a case? And the other thing is, the Republican Party, even though the vast majority of it was lies, bragged about policies. We did this. Most of the time it was a lie. We're going to do that. Most of the time it's probably a lie. The Democratic convention, where was the policy? So I hope that something was learned by the strategists in the Biden campaign, and I hope they come out swinging much harder in the weeks that we have left.
What you say about the RNC, it's true that they would take real human stories, human sentiment, individuals, and then they would wrap them in this other set of ideas or values or propositions, and you would see it. And the wild thing, even for me, where I'd be like, well, that part of it I appreciate and value and agree with, but they've taken it someplace else that I don't agree with or appreciate or value at all. And that was like a repetitive theme, but you're right, it was very well done.
It was so, they will take some story that is so touching and so real that if you didn't know the facts, if you didn't know the larger context, you think, wow, these people really care. It was like a purse thief saying, look over there, look over there. So they had you look over here so that you weren't looking over there at what was really happening. And that had to do with race, it had to do with the economy, it had to do with everything. They're playing a very tough game. One of the things I said repeatedly on the campaign trail was that the only way to beat outrageous lies is with some outrageous truth. And I hope we're going to see some more hard-hitting, outrageous truths over the next few weeks for the Democrats. Now, on the campaign trail, there were, to be honest, only 3 of us really laying down some outrageous truths, and that was you and me and Bernie, and Tulsi to some extent. So I hope a more radical level of truth-telling will be adopted over the next few weeks.
You have helped turn me on to several progressive congressional candidates around the country. I've been supporting some of these candidates too, and I'm incredibly grateful to you for both supporting some of them and also saying, hey, you should check this candidate out. And it's been a lot of fun for me. I sense that you share it too, because these congressional candidates are so incredible and awesome, and like they have the right ideas and values and policies, and they're not really getting a whole lot of visibility or support in many contexts. It has kind of blown my mind how little in the way of national resources is going to many down ballot candidates around the country in districts that maybe they're not a slam dunk for Democrats, but they should at least be competitive. And it feels like you and I are some of the only people supporting at least some of these candidates.
Where you and I differ, though, is that you have an attitude of, wow, it really blows my mind. I have an attitude of, how fucking dare they? Because there's a reason for what you just said, and that is the corporate democratic machinery that does as much to purge progressive voices on a congressional level and a senatorial level as they do on a presidential level, just like they did with the presidential race this time and they did with the presidential race last time in the Democratic primaries. And so the progressive candidates, and I agree with you, there's some great people, many of whom did not make it through their primaries, some of whom did. But they are not given the support. They often are not the people who already have their own resources. They're not lawyers and business people necessarily. They might be scientists, they might be teachers or whatever. And the money from the Democratic Party is given to those that are what they believe are the candidates who are more likely to win. This is why our friend John Hickenlooper, certainly he was a lovely man, but this is why we have John, who didn't even want to run. We have him rather than the extraordinary Andrew Romanoff in Colorado. It's why we had Sarah Gideon rather than Betsy Sweet. It's why we have Amy McGrath instead of Breuer or Booker. So there's something dark there, and I believe it needs to be named. And I believe that it's the wrong call for the Democratic Party. I don't think that's where the people of the United States are, and it's certainly not where the majority of Democrats are. The majority of people in this country, Andrew, want Medicare for all. When you look at things such as cancellation of college loan debt, when you look at things like universal health care, when you look at things like free college tuition at state colleges and universities, these are very popular ideas. So why are we running a presidential campaign where apparently there's more effort to lure Republicans than there is to please so many Democrats, particularly progressive Democrats? I don't understand it. I don't understand why there weren't more young people at the convention speaking. I don't know why there's not more reaching out. I don't know why the burden is only on them to fall in line. Some of whom I'm very frustrated with as well, don't get me wrong, because I do believe that the most important thing is to remove the fascists from the White House. But I also see on the part of the Democratic Party a pushing away of people who are voters, or at the very least potential voters, and that concerns me very much. It didn't work in 2016, and if they're not careful, it won't work in 2020.
I'm with you on the frustration, and one of the things that I saw work out in the primaries is that if you were progressive running against an incumbent, there were very, very few organizations or figures who will help you. And that's true even if, let's say you're a member of Congress and you're like a dyed-in-the-wool progressive. It's very, very unseemly for you to endorse someone who's primarying one of your current colleagues. Like that, there are some real rules against that in terms of decorum. And so if you are, let's call it a progressive Democrat running against an incumbent, it staggered me how short the list is of folks who might conceivably get behind you, because Democratic establishment is not going to get behind you unless the incumbent is mired in scandal.
Yeah, but Andrew, it's more than about incumbency. It's about more than incumbency. It's about a viewpoint of the corporate centrist Democrat. It's not just the incumbency. And when it comes to the incumbency issue, there have been some real wins. Look at Cori Bush. She was able to defeat a longtime incumbent. Look at Jamal Bowman, who was able to defeat the longtime incumbent. And of course, that whole trend was started with AOC, who defeated the long-term incumbent. So
Cori Bush in particular.
The race is on.
Cori Bush in particular, because it was in Missouri, and her opponent, I think his name was Lacy Clay, hadn't screwed up in like any mammoth fashion. I mean, I was excited for Corey's victory. But in Missouri, like, you can see it more clearly in a place like AOC's district or Jamal Bowman's district. But Missouri was an earthquake. The problem is that it is so remarkable, frankly, that you're like, no way, like an incumbent lost to their primary challenger. I looked this up, Marianne, because I love math. The incumbent re-election rate is 94%. So if you are going to defeat an incumbent, you're literally, at least statistically, looking at like a sub 10% chance of victory. And now, having seen the dynamics play out in these races, I understand that more clearly, because no one wants to help you, except for, frankly, someone like you, someone like me, sometimes, like a very, very small handful of organizations, because people are loath to antagonize the incumbent. And getting behind the upstart seems like a bad move, quote unquote, politically, even if you know that that person's in better step with the values of that district or with the American people. So
well,
the problems are manifold. Like, I'm actually starting now to get a clearer sense of just how screwed up the systems are in terms of what you just said about the majority will. It's like there are a lot of things that the majority of Americans agree on now, and then so you have the American people, then you have the corporate interests, then you have the legislators, and at this point it's not quite irrelevant, but it's almost irrelevant if the majority of the people are for it.
Well, exactly, and it's totally absurd and naive for us to even pretend that the political parties are seeing as their first job facilitating the voices of the people. They do more to manipulate and to dictate than to facilitate. Look at something like what's happening right now with Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is the largest social movement that has ever existed in the United States. And how much of a difference has it made in any legislation whatsoever? The voices of the people, this is what's wrong. The democracy itself is broken. And as far as the incumbency is concerned, it's a club. And the club has many ways of protecting itself and multi-layers of resistance to any penetration and to any change. And this is I think this might even be a place where you and I see things differently. Because I don't believe that an incremental boring from within is quite enough. I think we need a more fundamental disruption that will take a more massive...
Oh, I'm with you. Don't worry. I do not disagree one bit.
I read your tweets. I read some tweet where you said, the good thing about that is Joe will go for it and then he'll bring all the center with him.
I'm optimistic, and you disagree on Joe's appetite for going big on some of these relief efforts. But if you ask me, hey, incremental versus fundamental, I'm fundamental all the way. And the thing that you and I represented when you talk about the club, I feel like you and I get along in part because we tried to crash the party.
Yeah, but wait a minute. Let's be very clear. You made it. You were invited by the cool kids. You were invited in. So you get to sit with the cool kids now. Now, I am happy for you that you get to sit with the cool kids, but I don't think there should be a cool kids table in America. Not in American politics. I don't disagree with that either. Well, you're at the table, Andrew.
My goal would be to get to that table to the extent I ever do become a cool kid, which for the, Asian...
You've been invited in, Andrew. You've been invited in. Let's not pretend here. Okay, and your goal is what? To do with what with that?
To make the table enormous enough where, like, the everyday American actually feels like they can just come up and take a seat, and it's comfortable, and it's not like this crazy pyramid where, like, you have to be at, like, the pinnacle to feel like you matter. Like that to me is the fundamental truth right now in American life, is that our system does not care about the everyday shopkeeper, truck driver, retail worker, or whatnot, unless you happen to have $1 million stash that you're going to throw at the
So let me ask you a question. So you are as passionate as I am, and as passionate as millions of others, about direct cash relief.
Yes.
I see you talking about all the time. Well, have you noticed that the Democrats aren't suggesting it? So at what point do you think, when you say your goal is to change it, at what point is it going to change? And at what point does someone who doesn't color between the lines, that's the difference between you and me. We agree, but I have a bigger mouth than you do. I'm not as careful as you. I just say it. Maybe because I'm older. Maybe because I'm Jewish. I don't know why. And so I don't know where you get that. At what point? At what point do you think? I feel that their resistance to anything that messes with the basic power structure is more fierce than you do, because your experience is different than mine. They let you in. And I saw what they did to someone who was more vocal about what was happening. So I believe that there's a room for both. There's places for everybody to do it as they feel needs to do it. I don't think you're more optimistic about America, but I think you're more optimistic about the willingness of the system to self-correct, the system as it now exists.
Quite possibly, though now I'm 100% sure that we need to actually fix the machinery of democracy in order for it to represent the will of the people anymore.
Okay,
and,
so
in part because of what you just described about cash relief, to me it's obscene that you don't have every single Democrat on board with a version of cash relief instead of the 50 or so that currently are on board.
Thank you. And shouldn't it include Joe Biden?
Yeah,
shouldn't
sure.
it include Joe and Kamala? That's my point to you. That's my point.
So what we've done is we've actually tried to put pressure on individual members of Congress, say, why aren't you for this bill? Why aren't you for this bill? And we've managed to get a few more, not as many as I'd want, because to me, so apparently one of the magic numbers to try and hit interest is after you get 100 legislators on board, then it starts taking on like, oh my gosh, like this thing may pass.
What are the reasons?
What are the go and hunt essentially Democrats and say, look, get on this bill, and then get it to a point where it becomes the relief measure, hopefully.
What are the reasons or excuses that Democrats have given you for why they're not?
Well, I'm like you in that I think many of these members of Congress are just going to do whatever they think is in their political self-interest. So if you say to me, why are they not on this bill? It's because they think it's better for their political self-interest not to be on the bill. So then you say, well, how do you make it so that it's in your political self-interest to be on the bill? And one way to do it for me is for me to say, hey, look, the Yang Gang would like you a lot more if you are on this bill. Oh, and if you're not on this bill, then maybe we will support this person who's going to challenge you. And so those are the kinds of conversations that we have actually been having, and they haven't been as successful as we'd like because people right now do not see that it's in their political self-interest to do what the American people see as obvious, because right now 75% of us think that there should be cash relief during the pandemic. So once again, why is it that you don't just do what everyone knows is common sense and the right thing to do?
I don't know why you think it would make you unpopular to say to people, we're sending you money so you can survive. Why
exactly. Like, how is this not a home run for you?
And the same with Medicare for all, though. The same with so many of these issues.
So to me, I mean, there are so many problems stacked in here. The main problem is that if you are a member of Congress with a 94% success rate at being reelected, you just become this creature of Washington, and you have these consultants around you whose careers depend upon your continued membership in Congress. And so if someone comes and says, hey, like, do this big thing that will, to at least some people in your district, make you seem like, quote unquote, like radical or something along those lines, they have like 5 people who are essentially like their brakes on any kind of move like that, being like, no, like don't embrace this thing. They have barnacles on them, and the goal has to be that we actually make it so that they see that the water's fine and that if they go this direction, it will help them.
See, that's where you and I separate a little bit. It's called corruption. Total and complete corruption. It's not only what you said about their constituents, it's also about the leadership of the party. When Nancy says we're doing this, no, we're not doing that. And even the ones who would agree with us and are playing the long game so they go along. That's exactly what I mean. Now, until that's called, for what it is. And when you talk about all of the operatives, yeah, they're circus performers. That's why I call it a campaign industrial complex. It's thicker, darker, and deeper than I feel we're describing in this conversation. And it has nothing to do with a government of, by, and for the people. It's a government of, by, and for the corporate interests that are then
Barnacles.
spending all the money in order to make sure some people win and some other people lose. It's not just the consultants, it's what the consultants are telling them. And so, I don't know why in Congress, unlike in every other profession, we all have to make ethical decisions. You've been in business, you have a career where I'm sure you were called upon to make an ethical decision. I might make more money if I make the unethical decision, but I'm a human being who wants to respect myself, so I'm going to make the ethical decision. I don't know why we give Congress people a pass. Oh, well, he or she can't vote the right way because they'd lose their job. Lose your seat. Have some conscience. Lose your seat. If doing the right thing means you lose your seat, lose your seat. And we need to say that. And we need to call them on that. And we need to get over our delusion that if we just vote blue, it'll all be fixed. I mean, if you look at the bailout, this bailout, which is so horrifying, as I said, I call it the drop-dead bailout. It's corporate bailout as opposed to people bailout, right? And I know you feel strongly about this.
Yes.
It's really the same template as the bailout in 2008. The bailout in 2008 was corporations versus people. And they just took the same template and they went on steroids. The whole system is that corrupt. And yet the system mitigates against people calling it out on its corruption. And that's why it's going to be an awakening of the American people who vote in such massive numbers for people who are calling it. And what we have are so many people who recognize the corruption, but who feel that their way of resisting is by not voting, which I can't judge because I understand the psychological.
Yes, you can't judge because to ask them to pay attention to this zoo is just bad for their mental health. Is that bad for their frame of mind? It'll like make them angry and despair-ridden more than it's going to invigorate them. So that's the tough part, is that it's rational for a lot of people to check out because of just how bad it is.
I wouldn't call it rational, but it's understandable.
Yeah, understandable.
You have to give people something to vote for. That's the thing. Direct cash relief would be something people would vote for. Medicare for all is something people would vote for. College, cancellation of college loans. Do you know how many people would show up to vote for a presidential candidate who said, I'm going to make your life easier? And I'm sorry, it's not enough to just say, heal the soul of America. How about some policies that's going to make your life easier? It's not enough to just say, we're not Donald Trump.
One big structural change that I think might help activate members of Congress to try and get something done and then come home would be term limits, where you say, look, you have a certain period of time of service in our nation's capital, and then you're coming home. So now you don't need to worry so much about trying to stake out your multi-decade path to the committee ship or whatnot. Like, you could actually just make determinations based upon what you think the people in your are excited about, would like, and you have this term of service, and then you come home.
I have two minds about that. On one hand, elections should be term limits. That's what elections should be. Abraham Lincoln said there's not that much evil that any one government can do in this country as long as the people remain vigilant. What we have is the problem of gerrymandering and so forth, of course, which H.R. 1 that the House passed would fix. And if we get the House, if the Democrats get the House and the Senate, that structural reform might happen in terms of getting rid of gerrymandering, et cetera. However,
I love HR 1.
Even if we have the term limits, what you just said was then everybody would just do the right thing. I would actually argue, forgive the skeptic in me, but I think it's a healthy skeptic, that a lot of those guys are saying, well, I'm only going to be here for 6 years, 8 years, but then I'm going to try to get a job lobbying working for the people who really make all these machines run. So I'm still going to vote a certain way so that they will like me and hire me at the end of this.
I have the math for you, Marianne.
Okay.
42% of former legislators become lobbyists, and an additional 25% work for a company that includes lobbying as
That's
one of
my
its
point.
activities.
That's my point. So let's not leave that out of our calculation of what would occur if magically, because there were term limits, we're to assume they're going to do the right thing.
So let's supplement term limits and say, guess what? You have a 10-year ban on going to a lobbyist
Exactly.
or major firm that
Exactly.
included these activities that you touched as a legislator. And one of the things I would throw in there too, particularly if you were to have term limits and let's say a bar on certain activities post office, we'll give you a raise. It's like, tell you what, you do this thing for X years, we'll pay you even better. I mean, they're paid fine now, but they could, like, in my mind, it would be a very small price to pay if you felt confident that they were going to look out for the public interest.
I agree with that. Them and teachers.
Yeah, teachers need a raise too, for sure. So these are some of the structural things that I'm going to be trying to drive in the days to come. And I love any member of Congress who's for term limits, because then you could tell that they're truthful. It's
treating a symptom, though. It's treating a symptom. And sometimes you need to treat the symptom, but we're still going to have to get down to the deeper cause, because we have to talk about all of the ways in which the system mitigates against people doing the right thing.
Oh yeah, it's unfortunately it's like a layer cake, where I'd say term limits might be third or fourth on my list, like public financing of elections, gerrymandering.
Money in politics is the issue. That's the cancer underlying all the other cancers. I mean, until
the numbers again, Marianne.
Well,
you can tell I've been looking into this stuff.
Well,
the average successful congressional candidate raises $1.6 million, and then for Senate, it's over $10 million.
So, given the current makeup of the Supreme Court, it's not reasonable to assume we're going to be able to overturn Citizens United anytime soon. So we're going to have to go the direction of an effort at a constitutional amendment to establish public funding for federal campaigns. Because as long as the money floods the system the way it does, and then you have in addition to that the political parties themselves flood the system to keep out, in the case of the Democrats, the more progressive candidates. The more progressive candidates are the ones who are actually expressing the will of the people rather than the will of corporate interests. We have to have some more radical truth-telling here. We've got to just say this stuff, as sick as it is, because you heal in life through a kind of detox process. Stuff has to come up. We've got to start naming it. You know, I look at the American political system, and it's almost like we're a family, a big family where both parents are alcoholic. And the kids, who are the citizens, can tell, Mommy and Daddy aren't really telling the truth here. We're not having the conversation about what's really true. And you and I both know that off stage, a lot of them will have a more truthful conversation, but that doesn't make me feel better.
Well, this is the danger to me, Marianne, is that it almost doesn't matter who you get in there if the machine is this broken. It's like we can say to ourselves, look, if we just had like a different candidate in there, like we need to fundamentally change the incentives of the folks in power if we're going to see some of the massive changes that we need. And right now you get to DC, and the best people I know who are in DC are incredibly frustrated. They feel stuck like flies in amber. You know, they like fought through fire to go to DC to try and make a positive impact, and they get jaded and cynical pretty quick, or over a long period of time. Either way, like that town does need like a massive operating system upgrade or culture shift.
But
or
you're letting people off the hook that I don't let off the hook. Tell the truth. You will not only will you probably lose your seat for doing it, you probably will lose your seat. You know, it's not just that you might, you probably will. Not just because the voters will turn on you, but because the party establishment will turn on you. Lose it anyway. I know that as a candidate. I said things that, man, lady, you're getting off the stage. You're not going to be on the stage next time. But you know what, Andrew? Maybe I was not they were able to cut me off at the knees in terms of funding it, so forth. Maybe they didn't want me a little party online at the Democratic convention, but you know what? I'm still saying it. And in America today, you still say it. So, lose the election. Damn it, lose it. If it means you lose the election. And I honestly think, there's something about being my age. I'm old enough to remember, earlier today, I had the honor of talking to Bernice King, and who's Martin Luther King's daughter. And I have written quite a bit about her father, about Martin Luther King and Gandhi, etc. And I'm old enough to remember. I was a little girl, but I do remember the assassinations of Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King. And a lot of people younger than my generation don't necessarily realize the psychological effect, the chilling effect that it had on us. That people such as Martin, such as Bobby, who were speaking truth, juice, the real thing. You talk about the soul of America. They were literally shot and killed in front of our eyes. And there was a very loud, unspoken message in those assassinations. And those bullets psychically shot all of us. And just in case we hadn't gotten the message, they shot students at Kent State to make sure we got the message. And the message was, go home. There will be no further protest. Do whatever you want in the private sector, but leave the public sector alone. To whomever it is, once it's so bad, it's willing to kill in order to control it. And that's what my generation did, in large part. And we kidded ourselves that we still had a lot of choices, because we could buy the blue one, we could buy the red one, we could buy the yellow one. And it's only been in the last few years that we realize in the marketplace where this country so prides itself on variety and choice. You can have this kind of computer or that kind of computer. You can have this kind of refrigerator or that kind of refrigerator, but you have to have a narrowly prescribed political conversation. But you know what has happened to people who are my age? The idea that, as my father would say, the bastards got to you. The idea that we might die, knowing on the day we die that we didn't really do what we came here to do, is actually scarier to us than the thought that they might kill us if we do. To be a radical truth teller in America today is to take a risk. And my message is, take it anyway.
That's a beautiful message, and I think one that's very right for this time, for this time in American history. So you spoke at the People's Party. There was I believe it was mostly virtual. Some of my favorite people spoke. I mean, in addition to you, Cornel West, who I admire a great deal, Scott Santins from my campaign.
Yeah, he was great.
Nina Turner, and on and on. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm so glad you saw him. And that, like,
yeah,
I'm a huge,
yeah.
Scott
I thought it was wonderful.
Yeah, it seemed wonderful. I was a little envious. People who attribute universal basic income to me, I say talk to Scott. Because Scott's actually the progenitor of a lot more of the finding research.
Well, like I said, Milton Friedman, even Richard Nixon discussed it to some extent. I mean, it's a very, very old idea. Yeah, all the way back. But you have popularized it for our time, and you deserve credit for that.
Oh, well, thank you. I had a lot of help. So the message I got from the People's Party convention was, look, like, and you said it earlier in this conversation, it's like, look, I want Joe and Kamala to win. I want Trump to get out, because if Trump's the president, like, we can't get much of anything done. But then the message is for Democrats, hey, start actually enacting these changes that the people care about, or we need a new party. We're coming to challenge you. That was the message I got. Was that correct? Did I get the right message, I suppose, is what I
think a lot of progressives, myself included, feel politically homeless these days. After what happened in the last two presidential campaigns, after seeing what happened in so many of the congressional campaigns and the ways that you and I have spoken. When I was growing up, the serious liberal, at that time we would have called the serious liberal, which is today's progressive, had a home in the Democratic Party. And there's been almost a purging. So I'm a lifelong Democrat. I grew up as a Democrat. My father, every other word out of his mouth in any political conversation was FDR. It makes me very sad, because I think that the Democratic Party, like the Republican Party, has lost its soul to some extent. And both parties need to reclaim their soul. But I think it's going to be up to the Democrats. Hopefully Biden will win, and then it's going to be up to him, although judging how he's treating this campaign, I don't know, why are progressives treated practically like pariahs? And so there are a lot of people, particularly young people, who don't have the institutional memory that someone like I have. I remember a time when the Democratic Party was the go-to place if you really were making humanitarian concern for the people your bottom line. I remember a time like that. Many of these kids don't even remember that. And so, I have two minds about this. On one hand, if you look at our history, the Abolitionist Party came from the Abolitionist Party. The abolitionist movement came from the Abolitionist Party. The women's suffrage movement came from the Women's Party. Social Security came from the Socialist Party. So third-party voices have been very important in American history. But on the other hand, we all know the political realities that exist here. My personal choice will be that the Democratic Party sort of comes to its senses and allows the wider tent philosophically that they claim to be so proud of ethnically. And if that's the case, it certainly would be the place where I'd like to put my head on the pillow, but I'm going to go, my principles are more important to me than a party. And I know what I will be doing is going wherever those principles are given the respect that they deserve and the political power that they deserve.
My first choice during my run was for the Democratic Party to embrace a bolder set of policies and solutions and proposals than they seem to have. And universal basic income was obviously the one that I made the center of my campaign. But I'm with you that our political system right now is a duopoly that is not serving a lot of people well, and a whole, in a variety of ways, and that we all wish, at least I certainly wish, that we had a more dynamic political system that enabled different points of view. And because I'm the structured thinker that I am, to me, the big change we can make that would help is ranked choice voting. Because
yes,
right now,
ranked choice voting would very much help. Also, you say duopoly, and duopoly is the word that people use because there are two major parties. But I think in terms of the pattern that it represents, we need to recognize that the duopoly is a monopoly. And it's a monopolistic reality. This country, this is why we have antitrust laws, although we hardly prosecute
enforce
them
them
anymore.
even in the business world, yeah, much less the political
So
world.
it's a suppression of different voices. But I agree with you on the steps to get there. Ranked choice voting would be a very good idea.
Oh, because even now, if you look at the message that for a lot of folks during this run up to November, is they say, look, I'm going to vote for Joe and Kamala, but Joe wouldn't have been my first choice. And so if you had a more dynamic way of expressing your preference, then there's no more berating people for quote unquote wasting your vote. It's like
you and I would have done very, very well with ranked choice voting.
I like to think so, Marianne.
Yeah.
but this narrative around wasting your vote is really destructive. It's really corrosive. It's let voters just figure out who the heck they like, who expresses their point of view the best, who their values, their policies the best, and because right now, unfortunately, a lot of us now have become almost like investors in different ways. Where I remember when they started telling us which movies do well, it's like everything is all about I want to pick the winning whatever the heck it is, and not waste my preference. In this case, the vote on someone who's quote unquote not going to win.
That's all part of the manipulation. Another aspect of that was, remember the canard during the campaign that the DNC had to quote unquote narrow the field. No, they didn't. That's what the primary voters are for. So all of that ridiculous TV reality show with the debates, et cetera, where everybody is given 2 seconds or whatever, plus you and I and others got far less than everybody else got who were members of the club at the time. So all of that, these thoughts put out there, we have to narrow the field, you have to go with the one who can beat Trump. And I mean, really. I said so often on the campaign that we were living at a moment where what seems like the safe choice is probably the most dangerous thing you can do. Because Trump is not a politician, he's a phenomenon. And in too many ways, the Democratic Party is stuck in thinking of the 20th century. This is the 21st century. It's asymmetrical. But I don't want to go too much into that because right now we just want Joe to win. So there's that fine line where don't go too far.
No, I mean, I remember talking to you about that on the trail, and you and I agreed that like the goal was, in many ways, to start a contrary phenomenon, like opposite Trump. Like that was a vision. Certainly, like I agreed with you. Like when I was deciding to run, I thought, what we need is we need like a different approach. Because the machinery is failing in so many ways. And so if you have someone who reminds people of this failing set of institutions, like that might not be the winning bet. Though, like you, 100% Joe and Kamala, let's go and like win this thing. But certainly when I was trying to figure out how to defeat Trump circa 2017, 2018, it's one reason I ran. I was like, well, I think we need a different type of approach to politics. So you and I saw eye to eye on that. I mean, it's one reason we both ran.
Absolutely.
Well, you've started an important conversation for all of us, Marianne. You've been such a force for goodness and progress and enlightenment. I've learned so much from you. I felt like you were a fellow traveler, and when we met, you were so generous in spirit, where you saw me as someone who was running for the same reasons you were running. Like we were just going to try and do what we could for this country and this society. And so I've always been grateful to you, frankly. Like you were one of the first people that I considered a friend in this race, and I feel honored to be your friend. If there's anything that we can do together to help move this country in the right direction, I'm all for it. I think that you and I may have different approaches to some of these things, but I think both of us know that we would make very, very similar choices in the vast majority of of settings in terms of policy, values, trying to just improve the lives of the American people. And we need you really badly. Like, I love your voice. I love your vision and values. And a lot of Americans loved your vision and values. And I saw it. It's like there's all the bullshit. And then there's like when you're just like out there with everyday Americans, they knew, that they saw in you the person that you actually are. And being a part of that was like the honor of a lifetime for me, really. And considering someone like you, like a comrade in arms, really elevated my sense of what was possible.
Well, thank you, and I feel the same way about you, Andrew. And the march of truth, to the best of our ability to discern it and to articulate it, is bigger than any one campaign. And we're both still out there, and I feel the same way about you. Let's do whatever we can. Hopefully we did it with this podcast.